One of the most reoccurring themes that arises in my dominant discourse coaching sessions revolves around the topic of confidence. How do I build confidence as a dominant? How do I express that confidence, etc.? How do I start? So stay tuned, because by the end of this video, you will know the 3 biggest factors that contribute to dominant confidence or lack thereof. Now, I've been in the BDSM lifestyle for about 8 years now, half of those as a femdom. And throughout my experiences on either the top or bottom side of the switch, I have found that there are 3 biggest factors across the board, no matter what your gender, that contribute to your being able to navigate in your dominant energy, you being able to really step into it and start exploring it without fear or shame. And they are insecurity, intimidation, and imposter syndrome. Now, these 3 I's make all the difference in the world. And this is where I spend a lot of time in my dominant discourse coaching sessions, is working through these 3 I's. So let's break each of them down in terms of what they mean and the impact that they have on your dominant energy. Insecure, an ingrained codependency that leads to self-doubt. Now, I tell a lot of my aspiring femdoms, you cannot be an insecure dominant. But so many ladies have been programmed with codependency and programmed with performative receiving that when they have the opportunity to fully step into their femdom power, they get wrapped up in their head because they're still constantly thinking, what will he like? What will he like? Is he enjoying this? Am I being harsh enough? Am I being too dominant? Am I being dominant enough? All of these things. And so throughout this codependent training, quite honestly, this performative receiving mentality, you become highly, highly insecure. So that's the first I in these 3 factors, is insecure. The second is intimidated. And I say intimidated by ignorance or ambiguous boundaries. So you've probably heard the phrase, knowledge is power. Well, the same applies to BDSM. The more knowledge you have, the more confident you will be, because you'll know, okay, I know how to keep them safe. So I know exactly how to play in this. But if you don't have the information, if you don't have the knowledge how to keep them safe, just the basics, then yeah, you are going to be intimidated by your ignorance, by your lack of knowledge. So knowledge is power. Get the knowledge, get the information, get the education. The second factor of the intimidation is ambiguous boundaries. And this happens a lot with newbie doms that don't communicate enough. You think you have communicated thoroughly, but really you haven't. So really, you still have a huge sense of ambiguity when it comes to your submissives' limits, their hard limits, their soft limits, their desires, what incentivizes them, what de-incentivizes them, all of these things. So again, you will be intimidated by your lack of knowledge, either in your skill set or in your submissive. And then finally, imposter, where you feel inauthentic due to a lack of experience. And the imposter syndrome is common, not just in BDSM, but in pretty much any field that you could go into. If you're new, you might struggle with imposter syndrome, where you don't feel like, I should really be here. I don't really belong because I know what I don't know. And so if you're struggling with the imposter syndrome, you're not going to be able to step into your dominant energy. So look out, dominants and partners of, for these 3 things. Is there insecurity, intimidation, or imposter syndrome? The good news is, if you are a dominant, if you are an aspiring dominant, if you are the partner of the aspiring or new dominant watching this, there is hope, okay? You can reverse these factors and leverage them as strengths. So the first one, we're going to kill the codependency. So if we have this insecurity and it's codependency driven and it's performative receiving driven, then we're going to kill the codependency. And I actually had the opportunity to have an amazing conversation with one of my amazing patrons in my amazing Discord. And here's essentially a snippet of what she asked. She said, I love the idea of giving him, her husband, tasks to do, and I think it's super sexy, the worship aspect, but it's all new to me, so I'm looking for support here. What are some of your favorite subspace tasks? So do you see in her question how there was a desire? There was a desire on her part. There was a desire on her submissive husband's part. But there was this insecurity because, well, what do? I know what tasks that I would choose, but will he like these tasks? So when we're killing that codependency, especially for you femdoms, here's what I would suggest, and here's the advice that I gave her on Discord. The key to femdom is totally stepping out of any facet of codependency, including the, well, what if they won't like this thought? Start first by asking yourself what you want from him. He wants to worship and be used. So use him how you independently want and get the worship, adoration, and affirmation you want. Yes, of course, know his limits and keep his specific kinks and desires in mind for when he's a good boy and deserves a reward. Other than that, this is your time, your domain. Get what you desire. And remember, even if he may not, quote, like a specific task you choose in the moment, one, authentic submission doesn't begin until there's a disagreement or conflict of wills. That's when the yielding truly begins. And two, any possible momentary displeasure will be superseded by the fact that he's being used by you for your desires, and that is part of genuine worship. So let that resonate with you, especially you newbie or aspiring femdoms, okay? That is part of submission, is there is no submission until there is a disagreement or conflict of wills. At that point, the submissive chooses to yield their will to your will as the dominant. So that's what I'm saying. Even if you choose a task that the submissive may not like in the moment, if they want to worship and they want to serve, they will get pleasure out of the fact that they are pleasing you and serving you and worshiping you. So kick that codependency out. Kill it, kick it to the curb. It's done. Now, if we're feeling intimidated, the solution is to know your knowledge. And like I talked about in why we are feeling intimidated by our ignorance or by our ambiguous boundaries in our partner, is you need to know your knowledge on both fronts. It will go a long way to solve this insecurity and this intimidation. So essentially, you're going to know your knowledge in two main areas. Number one being full awareness of your partner's triggers, limits, and desires. And then you're also going to have full mindfulness of your chosen equipment and techniques. So once you fully know your knowledge in both, you're not going to be intimidated by ignorance, and you're not going to be intimidated by any ambiguity, because you've had those conversations. You know exactly where your partner's limits are, and you know just how far you can push them and where. And then you can actually just rest a little bit and enjoy yourself, because you know exactly where your limits are. And I have to say that this is a very understated benefit for dominance in safe words. It allows me, I'm speaking as a dominant here, it allows me so much beautiful freedom to know that unless I hear one word, one statement, one phrase, one sound, if I have a gesture, a clicker, bell, whatever, in case of speech impediments, unless I hear that one thing, I can do whatever the fuck I want. I can keep going. I can go harder. I can be more intense. I can do whatever I want until I hear that word. So that gives you as the dominant so much confidence, because you no longer feel intimidated by any ambiguous boundaries. And when it comes to the imposter syndrome that's hurting your dominance, I want you to understand that practice makes permanent. Not perfect. I did not say practice makes perfect, because perfect does not exist. Perfection is an illusion, and a very destructive one at that. Perfection does not exist. But you can practice your way into permanence. You can practice your way into a habit where you won't be so in your head all the time anymore. Maybe at first you will be. Maybe at first you're going to have to really sit down and plan out a scene and kind of go, okay, if he or she says this in the scene, then I'll do this. If he or she says this, and put together a little map for yourself mentally if you need to. But it's not going to be like that forever. Practice makes permanent. So Number one, that's what I want you to understand, new or aspiring dominants. Because something about imposter syndrome that you need to understand is every expert started as a beginner. Every expert started as a beginner. So just because you are growing, just because you're learning, just because you're adding new information to your arsenal doesn't negate the current information. It's just, here's where you're at today in your learning and your growth. And tomorrow you're going to have more in your arsenal. So every day you're learning, every day you're growing, every day you're getting better. So this idea of imposter syndrome is really based off of a very toxic, black and white, perfectionistic lie. And it's not true. So ditch that. Ditch that pressure that you have on yourself. You belong. Dominance, even if you're new. As long as your partner knows that you are new and you're not trying to front and you're not trying to play any games and you're not trying to manipulate, someone's going to have to be your first sub. Someone. Do you see what I'm saying? Someone's going to have to know that you're new and allow you the experience to not be new anymore. So it's okay. Just make sure that you communicate and that your submissive knows that you are new and work together. And especially if your submissive has more knowledge, this can be a really beautiful way in a relationship, especially to bond and to grow. And your submissive, you don't have to top from the bottom. You don't have to get overbearing or demanding. It could just be an answering questions thing. And that is an act of service to your dominant. You have more knowledge, so you're maybe just serving your dominant with the knowledge. You see what I'm saying? So again, dominance, you're learning. You're growing. You don't have to know everything to start. Every expert started as a beginner. You're no different. Just play in the space that you feel comfortable and consistently grow and practice your skills, and you will get where you want to be. But that is my advice to you. Those are the three biggest factors that will kill your dominant energy. If you feel insecure, if you feel intimidated, or if you feel like an imposter. So again, there is hope. You can absolutely kill your codependency, know your knowledge, and practice your way into permanence. You got this, dominance. Don't let the presence of your newness intimidate you away from getting started, because it is a beautiful, beautiful journey, even as you're just beginning.